Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar on leveling up your email security. Today's webinar is presented by IS Outsource, where IT means business. My name is Kads and I'm the Digital Marketing Manager here at IS Outsource, and I will be your moderator today. Before we get started, we'd like to cover a few housekeeping topics. Firstly, today's webinar is being recorded and we will be sharing a recording with everyone over an email. Secondly, you were muted upon entry. However, your questions and comments are welcomed. The Q&A box is on the right-hand side of your screen in the toolbar. Please feel free to leave your questions there at any time, and we will answer them live at the end of the chat. Now, it gives me immense pleasure to introduce our speakers today. We have joining from IS Outsource, James Barr, our cybersecurity and product specialist, and Dave Baggett, the founder and CEO of Inky Technologies. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks, Kads. It's great to be here.
Likewise, great to be here, Kads.
All right, the virtual stage is all yours.
So, hello, Dave. Can you highlight the importance of email security in today's increasingly digital landscape?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about what you're most likely to get breached by, it's a phish. So we focus entirely at Inky on malicious emails and phishing in particular. If you look at things like their annual Verizon security threat report, looks like 90+%. Sometimes it's 91%, sometimes it's 90% in a given year of breaches start with a phishing email. So ransomware comes from phishing. Buying fake gift cards comes from phishing. Wiring money where you're not supposed to comes from phishing. So email security, I think, really is the linchpin of a security strategy, along with things like multi-factor authentication to prevent account takeover. I mean, it's just absolutely essential to be on top of mail protection these days.
Agreed. It's critical and getting harder and harder to do from a technical standpoint as well as threat actors, begin using more and more pervasive and advanced techniques too, especially with the advent of generative AI just exploding in popularity and capability.
Yeah, we'll have to talk some about that. I mean, I can also talk about some of the techniques we use at Inky to block these mails. But how do you guys think about email security broadly at IS Outsource?
Well, it's really a multi-phased approach. You have technical tooling, such as using Inky, but also making sure that you have, your SPF record and DMARC and DKIM set up and working properly and in good order and stuff. But a lot of it also really comes back to user training. The human element
Yep.
is a huge and critical factor in the real world incidents that continue to happen primarily, like you said, through email. It is by far the biggest entry point for a lot of breaches, one way or another, into client environments. And so, I mean, we have, a cybersecurity bundle where we bundle a variety of different tools, including Inky itself, in that to recommend to clients to help secure things from the technical side. But the training piece is also huge too, and there are multiple avenues to go with that, both in terms of tooling and also human one-on-one or group presentation style training and such as well. And environments vary so much that it's also pretty important to do an assessment of a client's environment too, because you can't just slap the same patch on every client environment and call it good. A lot of things are different in each environment, and it requires massaging the right tools, the right training, the right processes into an environment to really get security into a good overall place to help mitigate the damage if something happens, and also reduce the likelihood that it will in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, and we're seeing the attackers getting just increasingly sophisticated. I mean, we've seen at least a half a dozen new techniques just this year alone. And our sense is, anecdotally, the pressure is increasing on the white hats like us because the attackers are getting smarter and smarter. We've seen, for example, even last year, we saw this explosion of QR code phish, for example, where the attackers were putting their malicious links in the mail encoded as QR codes, which is doubly clever because on the one hand, they know that the incumbent mail protection systems aren't looking for QR codes, so they can just put whatever they want in. On the other hand, they know that we all got conditioned to scanning QR codes during the pandemic, so it doesn't seem weird for a recipient to get a QR code in their email. Interesting stat that we've found: half of emails, a little more than half of emails that have QR codes now are malicious phish. That does leave the other half though, and so sometimes people say, well, can we just not deliver QR codes at all? And the problem with that is then people can't get onto the bus. They can't go into the museum, they can't go to their concert. That's just one example of one of the many things we're seeing lately.
Yeah, and like you said, the restaurant menu thing during COVID really conditioned everybody to start scanning QR codes almost blindly and without thought, when in reality they're just links. We're clicking blind links essentially, and that's obviously an issue of its own accord.
Yeah,
So
I know you've talked about, a healthy skepticism, training people to maintain a healthy skepticism about email, and I love that. Another example we saw recently was fake Venmo, well, actually real Venmo emails, but with the attacker abusing the Venmo service. And the way this one worked was anybody can go on to Venmo, and there are many open services like this where you can just create an account and use that service for free to send emails to people indirectly. But for example, you could go onto Venmo. So the attacker goes onto Venmo and they send you a money request. Please send me $99. And you would think, well, how does that really help the attacker? The person's just going to say, no, I won't send you the money. But these guys are really smart. So what this attacker did was he sends out his Venmo money request to a blast of a bunch of recipients, and he puts in the memo what you're paying for. You have paid $99. If this is an error, call this 1-800 number. And of course, then the recipient gets this Venmo mail, which is a real Venmo mail, right? It's not fake, it's real. From Venmo, it passes DKIM, SPF, everything passes. All the links are really Venmo. The only thing that's weird about it is that memo. And of course, maybe the recipient will see that it says you've been requested to pay $99. You're asked to pay, but probably their eyes are gonna skip over that and they're gonna read that memo that says you've paid $99. And then what the scam is, right? They call the number and then the person says, tell me your credit card info and I'll see if the charge is right. So, that's the kind of thing where even if you're using the best mail security system in the world that checks SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, it's not going to necessarily find that unless it's looking at the content of the mail. This is one of the reasons why, and we can talk more about this, but this is one of the reasons why we add dedicated models for specific kinds of tactics and specific kinds of phish like this. There's no just one black box that can tell you if a mail's are phish or not. I'm curious if you've seen kind of, particularly interesting phishing incidents affect your customers and how you think about, broadly guarding against these. And also, I'd like to hear more about this training people to have a healthy skepticism. I use the term paranoia. Maybe that's too negative, but
certainly, yeah, skepticism in general is considered a negative term for the most part, but it really depends on the usage of it. When it comes to email or instant messages, online communication in general, skepticism is healthy to have because of the rate at which fraudulent attempts come in, whether it's via email or other, digital or electronic avenues, although email by far and away is the biggest one, as we chatted about earlier. OpenAI and such and generative AI tools are making it very easy now for threat actors who don't even speak English to craft a grammatically proper and good sounding email template, for example, to just blast out to tons of people. And so, the advent of generative AI is great in numerous ways, but it's also there's a real dark side to that tool usage by threat actors, and they're really only barely just getting started. I suspect in the next year, 2 years, we're going to start seeing a lot more advanced threats really utilizing generative AI tool sets. And then when you think about combining that with leaked, state-sponsored threat tools from China in their government and stuff like that you can just buy on the dark web, it's really concerning. I think things are going to get worse before they get better over the next couple of years as, AI tooling really ramps up and becomes more, pervasive, and threat actors figure out more creative ways to use it. And, as far as like the types of threats, that we've seen clients fall victim to, the hacked mailbox is by the biggest, most common one, and that even having MFA does not protect against that in a lot of situations. We've seen a really steep rise in the last year and a half of token theft, getting someone to click a link in the email and they host like a very realistic looking, 365 login page, for example, and the person types in their credentials, and then that hosted web page takes the authentication token that has the real credentials, and they can just reuse it to log in, bypassing MFA to the real thing. And now, even though you have multi-factor authentication, MFA, they just log right in as you. And so, I mean, to protect against that is also, pretty difficult in some ways, or has a very steep impact on an organization to appropriately protect against that. And, there are always going to be technical threats that are new, haven't been seen before, or have new creative twists. And so you can't fully solve for that with technical tooling, although having great technical tooling helps a lot. So that's where, the human training element comes in, and teaching people to be skeptical, like, hey, yeah, sure, you've worked with this coworker for 17 years. You see that the email is actually from them. That still doesn't mean it's legitimate. The threat actor could have access to their mailbox and could be replying to an existing email thread asking you to do something that seems relatively reasonable within the context of that thread or your organization. Doesn't mean you should automatically do it. We've seen a number of businesses come to us where they have fallen victim to that because of a hacked mailbox. As soon as you can start sending from someone's real mailbox, you are essentially an automatic trusted person, and they think it's really you sending it. A business came to us a couple years ago that had fallen victim to a breached mailbox, and they sent a $2 million fraudulent wire transfer, and that money was never recovered. $2 million. That's not even a worst case scenario either. There have been some situations where a CFO's mailbox got hacked, and the CFO, nobody even noticed. And it took over a month before the threat actor started doing things. But they sat there, from what we can tell, looking through the mailbox and planning what all they were going to do for a month. And then they unleashed just a huge blitzkrieg attack of a bunch of different stuff to a bunch of different people, heavily utilizing existing valid email threads from that CFO's mailbox. And that was catastrophic. That's the kind of thing that can, under the worst case scenario, end a business entirely from one hacked mailbox. So we really can't overstate the importance of protecting email, even though it seems on the surface of it like nowhere near that important, or even almost nominal, compared to other forms of access like credentialed logins to, admin systems and that kind of stuff, or to your QuickBooks or what have you. Email is absolutely critical to protect as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, we think it's not a big deal because it's ubiquitous, but that's in fact why it is a big deal. And, to your point, the taken over mailbox thing has become a bigger threat recently, I would say in the last year or so, because historically what we would see is an attacker would get access like that. They would guess someone's password or get into their, mailbox, breaching the MFA somehow, and they would just immediately start sending out phish from that new account, which we can detect right away, right? Because we know phishing mails coming out, the volumes are much higher. Now we're seeing it's still not very common, but the problem is when it happens, it's devastating, like you said, where someone, instead of doing that, they'll get access and then they'll just camp out on the account. And they might do this for hours or days or even weeks or like a month, and like you said. And we've seen cases where the attacker will create a typo domain. So it looks like one letter off from the domain of the account they just compromised. And they will bank that domain so it doesn't fail a domain age check, because even the legacy email protection systems check for domain ages. If the domain was registered yesterday, that's a red flag, right? They'll bank the domain, and like you said, they'll wait for the opportune moment, and then they'll send a mail from this new domain, so it looks like it's a reply in that same thread, and they'll copy the whole thread. And we even found one case where the guy went in and edited all the mail addresses to reflect his typo domain, and went back and edited the HTML and redirect the wire or whatever it is. And this was a payment related instance that I'm mentioning. So that's another reason why you can't just have a single. It's not like phishing detection. It's not like spam detection. Spam is kind of like it's either spam or it isn't. with phishing, there's just so many variants that you can't have a single machine learning model. Even ChatGPT is not great at discerning these kinds of fish, right? It requires a lot more contextual information. So we now have a conversation hijacking detection model that looks at every single mail, looks at the entire conversation thread, looking for telltale signs like typo domains or weirdness with the time of day of replies and things like that, because it's impossible for a person to find this, and so the idea that you're training people to see fish, you can certainly help them, but I think you're exactly right. What you're really training them to do is be paranoid of the identity of the sender of a mail, because the attacker really relies on one thing, which is his victim has to think he's a person or brand that they trust. So he can either impersonate the CEO or CFO, he can take over a third party's account, he can impersonate a brand. It's got to be one of those kinds of things. And so training people to be paranoid about the identity of the sender is really key. And what we try to do at Inky is turn real emails into teachable moments to do just that. Not to say that every mail's bad. We don't just say every external mail's bad, because people just ignore that. But we'll take a minority of mails, like 10% of them, and we'll put a yellow banner on it saying, hey, we think this is a legit mail, but it's asking you to change your password. Confirm that outside of email, right? And in that case, we're trying to get them to slow down and think before they go and do the sensitive action. Similarly, if we think something might be shady for whatever reason, like, hey, that mail's coming from this person, their real account that they've mailed you from before, but why is it coming from Latvia? Because normally this person mails from North America. Maybe they're in Latvia. But we still want to tell the user, like, this might not be who you think it is. And as you say, engender that skepticism about, wait a second, I'm going to stop for 1 second, 2 seconds. I'm going to think, I'm going to send a Slack message. I'm going to pick up the phone before I go buy gift cards, right? Or before I go wire money. And what we found is, that combined with phishing awareness training creates this skepticism, the healthy skepticism that you need exactly in that moment where the recipient is interacting with the mail, because that's the dangerous moment, right? That 1 second, that 1 second where if you don't get them to stop and think, they're going to do something bad. And people think they're going to click on a bad link. Yes, that happens, but attackers are wise to that too. Most things are not just clicking a link anymore. There's a lot more, indirection. Like that Venmo case, it's calling a phone number, right?
Yep. And let's circle back on that too, because one thing we've seen a couple of times now in the last year and a half, which is becoming more common, is the use of SharePoint Online as the real SharePoint Online from Microsoft, where threat actors are hosting malicious content or scripts from to do things like steal the identification or multi-factor authentication tokens from people with. Because anybody in the world can go spin up a Microsoft 365 trial and get essentially all functionality for 30 days. And boom, now you can operate from the real thing, just like your Venmo example. And so, I mean, that's never going to go away or, be impossible for threat actors to do. And it just makes it easier to, claim legitimacy when there actually is none. The email banners that Inky does in particular, we have found to be really effective. Those banners popping up as yellow or red has really gotten a number of our clients to stop and not click the thing or open the thing or forward the thing in that email. And like you said, just all it takes is a split second, a pause, a hesitation to think, you know what, maybe I should run this by my IT, or maybe I should go check on so-and-so. Did they really ask me to do this? And that hesitation can save a huge amount of time, trouble, and pain from letting an incident happen. And there's a good example of what those banners look like on the screen right now. The gray for more normal, the caution with the yellow, and the red for danger. And those dynamic, contextually aware banners is something that Inky does really well in my experience, and they're just absolutely critical. 100 times more valuable than the traditional static, this came from an outside sender and that's it, and that's all it ever is, which a lot of people are used to, but that's not really helpful. It's always there, it never changes, you get used to it, and therefore it becomes like out of sight, out of mind. But when you only once in a while see that red danger one pop up, boom, now all of a sudden you're a lot more likely to pause and stop and not let the bad thing move forward.
Yeah, I always liken it to, the classic external tag, which goes on every mail. I sort of liken that to the parent telling their child, be careful. What does that mean? I'm 4, right? I don't know how to be careful. So, the other thing that we found with the banners is, and we've measured this empirically. We've actually done like studies with the university to measure the effect of these. It's important that you manage them down to a certain percentage, because if you put them on too many, as you said, they just become like a ornate border, like it's decoration. People just totally blind to them. And similarly, we've also found you have to say something in that banner that actually is helpful to the end user. So it can't be too technical, and it has to be broadly helpful to them. And you've got to keep, what we found is you've got to keep adding to these, because, for example, when the QR code thing happened, we added a banner type. First of all, we added detection to find and decode QR codes, right, in the body of the mails, in attachments, and so on. And obviously, if a QR code is encoding a malicious link, that's going to go to the quarantine or get a red banner. But we also put now a warning on any mail that has a QR code in it. And it doesn't say, again, it doesn't say the mail's bad. It just says, don't scan QR codes unless you know who they're from. Again, just trying to make the person stop and think before they point their phone at their screen and get taken to, a fake Microsoft login page. And to your point about, the free M365 account, we're seeing this, I would say over the last year and a half, 2 years, we've seen the attackers get a lot more sophisticated about doing what I call phishing with extra steps. And this is where they know if they just put something bad in the mail itself, even the legacy mail systems are going to find that. If they say, like, buy me gift cards, like in the body of the mail, almost every system is going to think that's problematic. But what if they point to some SharePoint document online that says something like that? Might have a bad URL there, might have some instructions there, might pretend to be like a wire confirmation, it might be wire instructions there, right? What that means is that you, as the victim, have to take an extra step to get there. But that's not a big deal for a person. They just click a link in the mail. And by the way, like you said, it goes to legit SharePoint. It's not like it's fake, it's real SharePoint. It's just hosting bad content. But for the mail protection system like Inky, it means we have to take the extra step. So we have to go on all these online services and look at the content that's hosted. And it's not just things like SharePoint. We've actually seen very clever uses of things like SurveyMonkey. SurveyMonkey can be used to create what looks like a fake Office 365 login page. So people have made credential harvesting pages using the free SurveyMonkey. We've seen people use the Microsoft Dynamics customer voice to send arbitrary communications to end users that, again, they're like legit sent by Microsoft. They're sent from Microsoft mail servers, they're DKIM signed, they pass every check, they look totally legitimate. It's just the content of that mail is malicious, right? So that's the kind of thing where we try to maintain a very tight feedback loop. And one of the ways we do that is on that screenshot you showed, you couldn't really see it. It's a little small, but right below that banner, whether it's red, yellow, or gray, there's a report this mail link. And when users report that, most of our partners let us see the reported phish, so our analysts can see what was reported. And this is one of the ways we stay on top of, like, what are these guys inventing to trick people? What are the new tactics? And that feeds directly into our development process to say, like, okay, well, now they're using QR codes to do this. Well, now they're using this technique to obscure their text. Now they're using zero font. Now they're using like reversible text. How can we develop a new module that will detect that sort of thing and that generalizes to new kinds of examples of that? Like, here's a cloaking technique that we haven't seen before. Is there a way we could generally deal with these kinds of cloaking techniques? And that directly led into, by the way, our process of rendering every mail. Every mail that comes in, we render it like in a browser. So we know exactly pixel for pixel what the end user is going to see. We also know what the text is they're going to see with post rendering. So if there's zero font stuff in there, we're going to know that that's not part of what they're going to read.
Yep. And then for those who may not be familiar with it too, when you click that report this email link that's at the bottom of the Inky banner in an email, it pops up and asks you, how you want to report it. You can verify that it's actually legitimate or let the Inky platform know that it's not legitimate, etc., and give that additional context, which then helps, Inky and Inky personnel learn the environment better, learn more about that email if others have received it too, and that kind of stuff. So, reporting mail is not just some almost like fake mechanism or anything like that. At least in the Inky platform, it matters and people should be doing it.
Yeah, and actually, if someone reports a mail as phish, that creates a real-time adjustment in our global models that will increase the likelihood that males similar to that will be considered fish. So there's almost like a crowdsourcing function, and it's completely real time. So if you report something as fish, similar male to that, because often these, one of the things we see is the fish are often generated by fishing kits. So I always like envision there's some like evil genius Walter White type figure out there that's coming up with these tactics, weaponizing them, and then that guy's making all the money selling the fishing kits on the dark web. And then the script kiddies are going and buying them, giving him all the money, and they're trying to use them to fish people. So we see huge amounts of commonality in the fish that we get because a lot of them are generated by a small set of these fishing kits, but they're constantly evolving. So essentially, reporting means that things from the same fishing kit are probably going to be caught as fish, even if we didn't have a specific countermeasure for them before. So it's a very powerful mechanism. And as I said, also, it gives our analysts a chance to understand, especially if we missed it for whatever reason, well, wait, how did this thing get through and why? So we understand now, as a result of that, very specifically the types of fish that get through the incumbent systems that we block, the types of tactics, the kinds of the way these tactics have evolved over time. And one of the things we found is the evolution is both sophistication, but also cost. So the attackers are smart enough to realize if they can make the mail protection system have to do more work, then that's burdensome on the mail protection system vendor. And they know that a lot of the incumbent systems, they're owned by private equity. They don't want to spend money. They want to sort of milk the thing for the value they can get out of it. They're not big on let's spend a lot of money on AI and R&D. The attackers know that, so they try to find ways like the QR code thing, where okay, now white hat, you're going to have to go through and every single mail find all the QR codes and decode them. Good luck financing that out of your IT budget.
Yeah, absolutely. And the training, again, this comes back to also training people to be skeptical, especially when something is asked for, whether it's like your password has expired and you must reset it. If you're getting that through an email, don't ever click it, period.
Yeah.
End of story. Even if it's legitimate. If you get a claim that your bank password has expired, don't go to anything in that email. Go to what you know the real website to be. If you're with BECU, go to becu.org directly, and don't click any links in an email from a bank or institution or your employer for that matter. And certainly never give a password to anybody unless you can absolutely validate that they should have access to that password and that they're legitimate. And that's going to be a pretty rare case. So.
And you've actually talked before about creating phishing awareness training examples that are quite clever, using aspects of things going on in the company and so on, and they're really effective.
They are, honestly, because anytime you start doing phishing campaigns to actually test and track and validate who's falling for those things, who's clicking on them, you start off with it easier. People get used to it. They stop falling for it. Then you increase the difficulty, rinse and repeat. Now you get a new wave of people clicking because they're more difficult, more legitimate looking, etc. And you keep doing that until you max out the level of difficulty in the platform, whether it's Inky's own phishing awareness training or whatever else. And then for me, the fun part actually comes after that. And that's when you start building custom phishing campaigns where like you work with the CEO or someone in management, what have you, and figure out a fake phishing email to create that actually shows it's coming from that real person, asking them to do something that like makes sense in the context of their organization or their relationship with that coworker, that they know they shouldn't really just automatically do, but it's pretty believable. And then you start catching a bunch of people with that too. And that's fun too, because it's a really teachable moment. It's like the almost like the Jurassic Park thing. Just because it's a real email from someone 2 offices over, don't fall for it automatically.
Don't trust the identity of that sender. I also had an interesting anecdote, which I think is very instructive. I was talking to someone who was pretty high up in IT at a very large, like Fortune 50 company. And she was saying one of their executives, the C-level executives, got phished. And I said, well, don't you guys do like phishing awareness training? And she says, yeah, but the C-level people always get out of it. They get their admins to get them out of taking the test. Like, no, you're the most targeted people in the organization. You need to be doing it, right?
Yeah, they're the most important people to have to go through that, not the opposite.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this fantastic dialogue, James and Dave. I learned a lot. I'm sure everyone else on this call did too. And with that, I'd like to thank our audience for joining us today. If you have any additional questions or would like to connect directly with IS Outsource or Inky, you have the information right in front of you on the screens. And you can also use our social channels on LinkedIn to ping us. Thank you so much for your time and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.